The Intercollegiate
Psychedelics
Network.
So thank you again for the invitation. Happy to share a little bit about what's going on at the University of Wisconsin Transdisciplinary Center and our master's program. So I'm serving as the director of our psychoactive pharmaceutical investigation master's program currently, and am on the executive committee for the Transdisciplinary Center. For the Transdisciplinary Center at UW-Madison, we've been working on psychedelic research for the past decade at this point, in the latest wave of psychedelic science. So we have phased clinical trials that are ongoing at UW-Madison. So the first phase 1 clinical trial of psilocybin oral capsules, actually, which is forming the foundation for all the additional trials, started in 2013. We've supported both the phase 2 and phase 3 efforts for MDMA for PTSD, as well as the phase 2 trial for psilocybin and major depressive disorder, and now an open label extension for MDMA and PTSD. So all the sponsored activities from not-for-profits that you see that are moving forward in the phased research space, UW-Madison has had a hand in these, and particularly with psilocybin from the beginning, really helping kick this off. But that's certainly not all we do at UW-Madison. So we also have strong biomedical research, not in the context of phased clinical trials. Here you're seeing some of the active investigator-initiated trials that exist, including studies for psilocybin with use disorders, including opiate use disorder, methamphetamine use disorder, looking at mechanisms, so including the interaction between environment and self-identity, the RECAP study, which is looking at the importance of memory of the psychedelic experience, the COPE pilot, which is using IV psilocybin to assess changes in sleep architecture, and again, mechanistic questions around memory for the experience, and then combinations of psilocybin with other types of interventions, in this case, vagal nerve stimulation. So those are all investigator-initiated clinical studies in human subjects. We also have active preclinical research looking at polypharmacology in rapidly acting antidepressants and proneuroplastic mechanisms of these compounds in non-human animal models. But as a transdisciplinary center, science isn't all that we've got going on. So psychedelic humanities is also very, very strong and active at UW-Madison, where we're really excited to have lots of wonderful researchers on this space. And you can see some of the projects we've already engaged in here. So looking at psychedelic cultures across the Huichol people to clinical trials, looking at the history of medicines, looking at contested cannabis globally. And then also convening some great workshops and series. So this environmental justice and multi-species world was focused on threats to the Bufo alvarez, or the Colorado river toad, due to over harvesting of 5-MeO-DMT. And this is just one example of a recent lecture in our Psychedelic Past, Presence, and Futures lecture series that at this point has had probably something like 20 entries around and through the humanities. This one's focused on the prohibition of peyote in colonial New Spain during the Spanish Inquisition in 1619, and part of an unveiling of a historical document that we now have in our special collections. And because we have, all of these researchers from across campus and doing all these different activities, we have the center interact strongly with a lot of other centers on campus. I think this is part of the reason that interdisciplinary collaboration and transdisciplinary collaboration is so strong at UW-Madison. So we interact with the American Institute for the History of Pharmacy, the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies, the Z Pharmaceutical Experimentation Station, the Center for Healthy Minds, the Center for Science and Technology Studies, looking at actually science as a social study and how scientists and science progress in a social fashion. And then also with the Wisconsin Institute for Sleep and Consciousness. So the Center for Healthy Minds and Sleep and Consciousness, in particular, are run by some real heavy hitters in the space, and we're very proud and excited to help understand big problems like the hard problem of consciousness that Giulio Tononi and others are trying to analyze through the model of IIT and see where psychedelics can potentially take us as we ask those types of questions. We have a lot of affiliates and partners. You can see a subset of the faculty and other affiliates on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side of the slide, you see the departments from which we're drawn. So this ranges not just again from the sciences, but from humanities and across campus. So from pharmacy to human ecology, family medicine, Latin American studies, psychiatry, English, anesthesiology, Asian languages and cultures, nursing, history, animal and dairy sciences, neuroscience, botany, biomedical engineering, and then also community partners that we engage with throughout our projects through the Madison Psychedelic Society and community advisors on research design and strategies. We think this active outreach beyond the halls of academia is an important thing to really move that transdisciplinary label and focus forward. So the other thing that we do in the center is, of course, have regular symposia. So this will be our third annual symposium coming up in 2023. It usually takes place in either the last week of October or the first week of November. And we certainly invite you to consider joining us for this symposium. We've already got a handful of good speakers, including some that you're going to hear from today. And we've had great success with that venue with that event in the past, and are actually changing venues this year because we've sold out all the other times. We're hoping to get a little more space for more people. So that's kind of the broad overview of the center. I would say if you remember anything from that, the key takeaways I'd kind of like to put in your mind, right, are that psychedelic science is not an especially new thing at UW-Madison anymore. From that phase 1 clinical trial back in 2013. Now we've been doing this for a long time. And also that we've got, I think, a really great focus on transdisciplinary work, and are trying to drive the field forward, especially in the areas of substance use disorder, mechanism, and the humanities. The other thing we have that I think is pretty unique at this time is we have active master's program that is focused on psychedelic science, and that is the Psychoactive Pharmaceutical Investigation Master's Program. There is also an affiliate capstone certificate that can be built into the master's degree. This program has been running since 2021. Presently, we have almost 70 students in the master's degree itself, and approaching 30 students in the capstone. So all told, we're pushing 100 students in the program. And the curriculum is focused on delivering psychedelic scientists. So in contrast to a lot of other programs that are training programs for facilitators, we're really focused on delivering people into the science space, into the policy space, into the regulatory space, because ultimately this is a focused degree underneath the banner of pharmaceutical sciences. And the curriculum is broadly broken into program management, drug development, history and humanities, and clinical application. And if you're interested in looking more about our curriculum, I certainly invite you to go to our website, and the QR codes here will take you to all of those things. But ultimately, this is a 30-credit degree. It's designed to take about 2 years on average, but people have been spanning between 1 and 3. It is largely asynchronous and online, although the courses you can see with an asterisk next to them, like advanced independent study and summative research internships, are certainly opportunities that students have been taking advantage to get on campus, get into labs that are doing psychedelic research, get into companies that are doing psychedelic science, and get their hands wet and to really begin building their portfolio of active skills. So you can see we've got a lot of great core courses, but there's also 6 elective credits that everybody takes, depending on what your focus is. And We think there's a lot of great flexibility built into the program. We have a lot of non-traditional learners, people who are maybe already in the pharma space and looking to upskill or reskill, or folks who are in clinical realms and looking to add on that capstone certificate, or move into the regulatory or educational space. We also do have scholarships for the PPI program. We've awarded them in every semester and continue to intend to. The scholarships range up to $12,000 per term, and people can reapply for every single term. We just awarded the scholarships for fall, which is always a really fun process. And we're really committed to trying to make sure that scholarships are going to people who would otherwise have significant barriers to entering the field of psychedelic science. Whether personal, financial, or otherwise. So if this is a program that interests you, please keep these scholarships in mind. The other thing that was really exciting this year was a drastic expansion of our internship partners. So you can see some of the internship partners that we created as bespoke opportunities specifically for our students this year, and have lots of great engagement with these companies, things ranging from patent law to public policy, to drug development, to ketamine-assisted therapy clinics. And as of this May, we have 15 graduates coming from our program. There's a host of roles that are held by either current students or those recent alumni, things like being a clinical research coordinator, a research specialist, data scientist, paralegal or patent analyst, business development consultant, dispensary agents and lab technicians are some of the roles that people hold, and you can see some of the companies and institutions at which our students have found themselves after taking this degree. So overall, we're really excited about the trajectory of where students are going. We just brought on a full-time career counselor and internship and industry support liaison position. We think it's vital that students not only get a good education, but have a good chance to get a good job. So that's the master's program. I do want to say underneath the aegis of the center, we also have opportunities for PhD students and postdocs, although those are going to be not formalized underneath a specific program, but kind of would be underneath other great programs that we have at the UW, things like neuroscience, molecular and cellular pharmacology, pharmaceutical sciences, or other graduate level training programs. So if you want to learn more about those programs, please take a look at these codes. You can either learn more or apply. And I think I used most of my time. Apologies for the technical difficulties getting this going. But if we do have a moment for a question or two, I'm happy to do so.
I think a question most people are probably wondering is, what are you generally looking for in applicants for your program, specifically, I suppose, a master's program?
Yep. So the thing that we were looking for is a solid foundation in the sciences, especially biology and chemistry, and people who have experience with organic chemistry and biochemistry in the classroom level are required from the coursework level. And then, of course, we're looking for people to bring diverse life experiences beyond the classroom to the program. So we've had folks come in with backgrounds, who are lawyers. We've had folks come in with backgrounds who are doctors. We have lots of folks come in with backgrounds who are bachelors in biology, chemistry, or psychology. We also have a good number of health professions folks, so nursing and pharmacy. But the main thing is, making a compelling case for why you think this degree is right for you, telling us, what you would do with it beyond just being passionate about the area. What would the real trajectory be? And then showing that you've taken rigorous coursework, because these are truly graduate level courses with some, hardcore neuroscience, medicinal chemistry, and pharmacology material. And we want certainly all of our students to succeed. So.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Winter, and thank you for just sharing about everything that Madison is doing. It sounds like a fantastic center is forming there. Up next, we will hear from UC Davis's Institute for Psychedelics and Neurotherapeutics, presented today by Dr. David Olson. Dr. Olson, thank you for joining us today.
It's good to be here. Can you hear me and see the slides just fine?
Yes.
Okay, great. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the UC Davis Institute for Psychedelics and Neurotherapeutics, or the other IPN. It's confusing now that there are two IPNs, but this is the new institute that was formed at UC Davis. For those of you who are unaware, the Institute was established back in September, and I really think this was a historic investment for the field of psychedelic science. Now, there's lots of centers and institutes and working groups across, the United States and the world dedicated to psychedelic science now, which is fantastic. But most of them, as far as I know, have been funded almost entirely by private philanthropy. And this is really the first time that a major university has put their money where their mouth is and says, we think this is a really important area of investigation and we want to support that. And so the IPN was established with a $5 million investment from the Dean of the College of Letters and Science, the Dean of the School of Medicine, the Provost, and the Vice Chancellor for research. And for a public university like UC Davis, $5 million is an enormous amount of money. And I think that really just speaks to how committed UC Davis is to psychedelic science. Now, who is involved in the IPN? We haven't announced everybody on the website yet, just because we've been so busy, but we have over 50 principal investigators spanning more than 30 departments and centers. And we have a very simple two-part mission. Our mission is to, number one, advance our understanding of the basic neurobiology of psychedelics. And number two, to translate this knowledge into safe and effective therapeutics. And one of the reasons that we think that we have a chance of achieving this mission is because of the incredible collaborative environment at UC Davis. The neuroscience environment at Davis is truly remarkable. We have something called the UC Davis Neuroscience Consortium, which brings together lots and lots of groups that are focused on neuroscience, including places like the Center for Neuroscience, the Mind Institute, which studies neurodevelopmental conditions, the Center for Mind and Brain, the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, which focuses on neurodegenerative conditions. We have one of the only primate centers in the country. And we have a lot of other imaging centers, metabolomics, engineering, et cetera, et cetera. And so the way we envision the IPN working is like this. We raise some money through a combination of grants, private philanthropy, and sponsored research agreements with companies. And we then do some basic psychedelic research. And then we partner with all of the great people in these other groups at UC Davis, like the Mind Institute, like the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. That allows us to create something fundamentally new, something that we can engineer to be novel and highly innovative and having advantages for various patient populations. And then in order to get these academic discoveries into the clinic, there's a kind of a translational component where we partner with either large pharma, small biotech, or we spin out our own companies to make sure that patients actually benefit from our discoveries. And so at this point in time, the clinical arm of the IPN is very young. We're currently hiring to get a lot of clinicians to come in and start doing some clinical trials on psychedelics and related compounds. A lot of them will be focused on mechanistic studies and also trying to figure out what other patient populations might benefit from these types of agents. But we have, some new space in the med school in Sacramento for administering these types of medicines. And so we're very excited about the way the clinical program is developing. But today I want to focus on our preclinical efforts because those are what are a little more advanced. And I'm going to go through just a few projects that are ongoing in the IPN that you may or may not be interested in. So one of the things that we're focused on is the development of psychedelic related molecular tools. And I'll just give you one example of one of these molecular tools. when we entered this field, there was really no cellular assay for hallucinogenic potential. If you tested a molecule like LSD and glyceride, one being hallucinogenic, one being non-hallucinogenic, they both looked like a 5-HT2A receptor agonist. And so to solve that problem, we developed a novel biosensor based on the 5-HT2A receptor. We simply lopped off the third intracellular loop of this GPCR, and we fused on a circularly permuted green fluorescent protein. Now, the way the CPGFP technology works is there's a cut in the beta barrel, which opens it up and allows water to get in and quench the fluorescence of the fluorophore. But when a ligand binds to the receptor, there's a conformational change, closing the beta barrel, protecting the fluorophore, and allowing fluorescence to turn on. So here you can see that serotonin turns on the biosensor, but these antagonists do not. Now, what was really interesting to us is that the potency in this biosensor assay correlated very nicely with human hallucinogenic potency. So we started calling this Psychlite. Now, what was really exciting is that Psychlite could differentiate between closely related hallucinogenic and non-hallucinogenic congeners. So I'm showing LSD and glyceride, which is very closely related structurally. The only difference is you flip that stereocenter and add a nitrogen. You can see LSD turns on the biosensor, glyceride does not. Same goes for this pair, 5-methoxy-DMT versus 6-methoxy-DMT. Just move the methoxy one position over on the indole. The hallucinogen turns on the biosensor, the non-hallucinogen does not. So in addition to developing molecular tools, we're also looking at the circuit level mechanisms of psychedelics. And to do that, we use a whole host of things, including optogenetics and chemogenetics and all the tools of systems neuroscience. And we're trying to answer questions like, what mediates the hallucinogenic effects of the drugs? Which circuits mediate the antidepressant effects? Which circuits mediate the anti-addictive effects? Because not all of these are going to be the exact same circuitry. And so to give you an idea of an experiment that we would do in vivo using something like fiber photometry, here's an example where we've expressed the Psychlite biosensor in the prefrontal cortex. We gave a single dose of 5-methoxy-DMT, and we can see that the fluorescence of Psychlite rapidly turns on, and it tends to correlate with this behavioral measure of hallucinogenic activity. That's the head twitch response. But what is really remarkable is that the head twitch response wanes over time, but the activation of Psychlite remains elevated for some time. Now, if you give a vehicle or an inverse agonist, you see either no change in Psychlite fluorescence or you see a slight decrease. Now, in addition to the circuit level mechanisms, we're interested in the molecular mechanisms as well. And so something that our group found a while ago is that molecules like psychedelics are what we call psychoplastogens, which are very good at promoting the growth of cortical neurons. We know that in the healthy brain, cortical neurons have lots of branches, lots of dendritic spines, but that in many brain disorders, including neuropsychiatric diseases and neurodegenerative diseases, these neurons physically atrophy, and psychoplastogens can rapidly restore synaptic connectivity in the cortex. And so one of the first studies we did to get at this question was simply to test the effects of various psychedelics. And you can see here that compared to the vehicle control, the psychedelics DMT and LSD have substantially more complex dendritic arbors. And if you do some super resolution microscopy, you can see that they also increase the number of dendritic spines and these filopodia-like structures. Now, it's great that we figured out that these compounds could promote cortical neuron growth, but we wanted to know exactly what are the targets. And so here is a study where we used a genetic tool, these 5-HT2A receptor knockout animals, and we see that the effects on structural plasticity are completely gone, suggesting that it's the 2A receptor that mediates psychedelic-induced neuronal growth. Now, we had some other really interesting results based on some of these early findings. And one was the fact that this molecule here, serotonin, could not do the same thing that psychedelics could do to cortical neurons. And we reasoned that perhaps it was because serotonin can't cross the membrane to access the intracellular pool of 5-HT2A receptors. And so here's just one simple experiment where we have two neurons sitting next to each other in a dish. The one here on the right expresses a transporter and can import serotonin. The one here on the left does not. And what we find is that DMT can increase the growth of both of these types of neurons because it can passively cross the cell membrane. But serotonin can only increase the growth of neurons that can import the monoamine, suggesting that the target is a unique intracellular population of 5-HT2A receptors. Now, something else that we're very interested in is identifying translatable biomarkers of psychedelic efficacy, going from cellular studies to preclinical animals to humans. And I'm not going to have a lot of time to talk about this, but I just wanted to point this out that we're very interested in that. We're also interested in the development of new psychedelic-inspired medicines. And so I'll give you one example of this. So here is an atypical psychedelic compound, ibogaine. Now, ibogaine has shown a lot of promise for treating substance use disorders, and it also has some antidepressant effects. But there's a lot of issues with ibogaine. Number one, the hallucinogenic effects limit its scalability, but number two, it binds to an ion channel in the heart, which can cause cardiac arrhythmias, and several people have actually died during their ibogaine treatment for their substance use disorders. So we do a lot of medicinal chemistry. So we chop up the molecule, we make small structural changes and see how that impacts function. And that allowed us to identify a molecule that we call tabernanthalog, which promotes cortical neuron growth to a comparable extent as this hallucinogenic compound DOI, but it's non-hallucinogenic in preclinical species, and it has substantially improved cardiotoxicity profile, yet it still has a lot of ibogaine's very impressive therapeutic effects. It has antidepressant-like effects in this assay. It has anti-addictive effects in this two-bottle choice paradigm for alcohol use disorder, and has anti-addictive effects in this model of heroin use disorder. So in addition to developing new molecules, now we've developed some are non-hallucinogenic compounds. We're also developing novel hallucinogenic compounds because they can also be useful for certain patient populations. And then finally, we're trying to see where psychedelics might also be useful. What other types of conditions could these demonstrate some kind of efficacy? And what type of molecule would you want for a particular patient population? And then last but not least, we just got a very large $3 million grant from the Keck Foundation to study the role of endogenous psychedelics in health and disease. So we all have endogenous psychedelics like dimethyltryptamine in our bodies, but a big question has been, where in the body are they produced, when are they produced, and in what quantities? And do they have some relevance for just normal physiology or potentially in the onset or treatment of disease conditions? And so with that, I went through very, very quickly because I wanted to leave time for questions. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about the Institute.
Hi, Dr. Olson. Thank you for that presentation. I was wondering if you're taking any students in this upcoming round of applicants, and if so, what kind of students, or do you think you'll be taking students in future years? And any questions you can answer about the type of students that generally you're looking to have apply.
So for my personal lab, so I want to break this into two questions. So for the IPN, to become affiliated with the IPN, all you need to do is become affiliated with an IPN lab. So once we post the list of faculty on the website, if you come to graduate school at UC Davis, in any graduate program and you're affiliated with one of those labs, you will be an IPN affiliate and you'll have all the benefits of that, which includes seminar series, it includes access to personnel, it includes access to pilot grants, it includes access to certain types of equipment, collaboration, etc. For my personal lab, we are a very diverse group. We do everything from chemical synthesis to molecular neurobiology to in vivo behavioral neuropharmacology. And so I take students from many different graduate programs, including chemistry and chemical biology, neuroscience, pharmacology and toxicology, molecular and cellular and developmental biology, forensics, etc. So what we're looking for people who are super, super passionate about doing science and learning a lot of different types of science. You know, as you can imagine, you get exposed to a lot of different types of things in my group on any one day. And so we like students that have that kind of broad approach to science and are the best way I can describe it is fearless. People who want to go after a really big, hard problem and are not afraid to take risks and really swing for the fences to do something pretty incredible.
Thank you so much for your work, Dr. Olson, and for sharing about your center. I just wanted to first highlight to anyone watching that we talked about one of our judges, Dr. Lindsay Cameron, who worked with Dr. Olson. I know this because I'm a fan, and was largely involved in a lot of the work that Dr. Olson shared. And also, just as a side note, if we're talking about IPN, maybe we can be IPN and you can be the IPN. Maybe that's a distinction. But
to go back to that first question, the kind of students we're looking for students like Lindsay Cameron. She is a perfect example of the kind of fearless scientist that we really like to work with.
Yes, she is so innovative and she really communicates her science really well. And so do you. And I am so curious what you would put into words, I guess, for the future of what you see the IPN's contribution to psychedelic science being uniquely in terms of all the other centers and all the other labs. Like, what do you feel like UC Davis and IPN is doing that is different? I'm kind of gunning for an answer here. I hope you know what I'm asking.
I think there's a couple of things. I mean, I think everyone's making really important contributions to this field. And I think it's really important that we focus on collaboration. And that's why, we're collaborating with lots and lots of people at other institutions that are interested in psychedelic science. But the unique perspective that I think we have is one related to drug discovery and development of new medicines and new chemical and molecular tools. That is a perspective that I think a lot of other places don't have, because it really integrates chemistry and molecular science.
Exactly. And also your really, really interesting work on the non-hallucinogenic work and the trials and everything that came from your lab. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I see there's a question in the chat, I think talking about some of your specific work in the context of how people may participate, which is, does the intracellular import of 5-HT2A agonists or the activation of the PsycheDelic biosensor have any structural effects on perineuronal nets and their interactions with paravalbumin interneurons? Is this something you may be looking into in the future?
Yes, I guess. So one thing I can say is we've published a paper on tabernanthalog affecting the function of paravalbumin positive interneurons. So one thing that I think is really interesting about this class of medicines in general, and this is where it's unique compared to a lot of previous medicines for neuropsychiatry, is that we're moving more towards a healing-based approach. And we've induced deficits in preclinical models through chronic stress paradigms. And when you do that, you can see changes in dendritic spine density on excitatory neurons, but you can also see deficits in calcium dynamics. You can see deficits in paravalbumin positive interneuron function. But we found that if we give a single dose of tabernanthalog and you come back 24 hours later after the drug is cleared from the body, we've rescued all of those deficits. And so it seems to be kind of resetting the entire network. And presumably that does also impact perineuronal nets, although we have not directly addressed that question.
Amazing. And do you have any indications that or maybe classes of indications that the IPN wants to look at beyond, like, I guess, the typical indications that psychedelics are being looked at for as therapeutics?
Yeah, there's a couple of areas that we're very excited about. One being neurodegenerative diseases. We think that there's a lot of potential here because various molecules in these classes not only have this growth phenotype where we might be able to repair some of this damaged circuitry, some of them have potent immune modulatory properties. So the effects on microglia could be really interesting. And the other area is something like schizophrenia. That's an area where a traditional psychedelic is probably not going to be super well tolerated for obvious reasons. And so the development of non-hallucinogenic psychoplastogens for that patient population could be also very unique. But in addition to that, we're working with some of the engineers at UC Davis who are very involved in brain-machine interfaces and these types of things to see if psychoplastogens could augment some of these other modalities. We're looking into recovery from stroke and traumatic brain injury. We're looking at pain and headache disorders. There really is an incredible number of potential indications for these medicines.
I am so glad you shared this. I know people are so interested in all of the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing your expertise and all that the IPN is doing. in conjunction with IPN. Thank you for supporting us as an organization too. And for sharing on UC Davis's Institute for Psychedelics and Neurotherapeutics. And next, we are going to be hearing from Emory Center of Psychedelics and Spirituality, presented today by Dr. Roman Politsky. I'm so sorry if I butchered your name. Please correct me. And Dr. Politsky. Oh, amazing. That was a 1 in a million chance. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I'll just queue up my slides here. Okay, great. Well, first of all, it's really an honor to be invited and an honor to be among such amazing company. As a speaker, I'm probably a little bit closer to the student side of the spectrum than some of our recent speakers. So I definitely, these are folks that I have appreciated for some years now. So I just wanted to say that. So my name is Roman Politsky. I use he, him pronouns, and I'll be talking a little bit about the Emory Center for Psychedelics and Spirituality, or ECPS, and the work that we're doing down here in Atlanta. A little bit about me. I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, and as I mentioned, until recently, I was a student, so I got my PhD in 2020, did my residency and fellowship at Brown, and then I came here at Emory, where I've been for a little bit less than a year. My role is Director of Research Projects at Emory Spiritual Health, and I'm also a research faculty at ECPS. So my role at ECPS lets me bring together the clinical side of my training, but also another side, which is that I have a Master's in Divinity, which I obtained from Harvard in 2010, focused on the academic study of religion. And that interest has really stuck with me throughout the years of clinical work and research. And at ECPS, I kind of bring these clinical and research interests together. So we're doing rigorous clinical science, focusing on psychedelics, and our focus on spirituality also involves high quality, collaborative, academic and community work in the study of religion. And I really think that that's kind of what it takes to do this work well. So a little bit, for some reason it's not advancing. There we go. So I'll give a little bit of an overview of our center. We are, something that makes us sort of unusual is that we're kind of the offspring of two large Emory programs. One is the Emory Department of Psychiatry. And so this is a top-ranked nationally psychiatry department housed in the Emory School of Medicine. And we have very extensive research programs in psychopharmacology, in neuropharmacology, and also in clinical trials studying pharmacological interventions as well as psychotherapeutic interventions. The other program is Emory Spiritual Health, which is where I'm housed. And Emory Spiritual Health is the largest CPE, or chaplaincy accreditation training program, nationally and also in the world. We oversee clinical services across 12 different hospitals for chaplaincy, which amounts to over 80,000 patient encounters every year. And also we've developed a reputation for evidence-based practices and research in spiritual care, which is a really important part of what spiritual health at Emory does. So these two programs have come together to create the Emory Center for Psychedelics and Spirituality. This is reflected in our leadership. So our co-directors are Dr. Bodhi Dunlop, who is a professor of psychiatry, and Dr. George Grant, who is a clinical psychologist and executive director of spiritual health. And together, the center has kind of formed its personality based on the skill sets that they bring, which is, on one hand, a very rigorous clinical trials approach to studying psychedelics, really grounded in a background and expertise in doing research with pharmacotherapies and psychotherapies conjointly, as well as evidence-based spiritual care and its implementation within large medical systems. Under this directorship, the center has grown tremendously. We're a very young center. We were founded in in the fall of 2020. And already, so I'm not going to include all of the faculty that are part of the center, but we include members from psychiatry, spiritual health, of course, palliative care, religion, philosophy, preventive medicine. This is less than a third of the faculty that are active members of the center, not just passive affiliates. With this many researchers, I definitely don't have time to talk about everything that we've been doing, but I'd be remiss not to mention the work of Barbara Rothbaum and Jessica Maples-Keller, who have been innovating MDMA-assisted psychotherapies for PTSD. Chuck Raison, who's also director of research at USONA, but one of the reasons that we've been working closely with him are his contributions to understanding the mechanisms and optimal implementation of psychedelic therapies. Excuse me. I'll also, excuse me. I'll also mention Dr. Deanna Kaplan, who is a methodologist who's been working to expand and improve the methods that we use to study psychedelics and their impact, not just within the lab, using instruments like scanners and questionnaires and assays, but also out in participants' daily lives as they go about their days. So I won't be able to talk about all of the various accomplishments and research that many of these faculty have done, but I'll just mention a few of our recent notable publications, and also some of the other initiatives that we have currently and are planning for the future. So several members of our center, of course, were involved in the research and the publication of the recent phase 2 trial of psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression, published in New England Journal of Medicine. I already mentioned Drs. Rothbaum and Maples-Keller, who've been doing work not only on administering MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, but also examining the mechanisms by which MDMA may help to address the symptoms of PTSD. In addition to our research work, we're doing a lot of work to disseminate psychedelic knowledge. So, like our colleagues at UW-Madison, we also have an annual symposium. This happens in April, so you can attend both. Our symposium on the science of spiritual health focuses on spiritual health and psychedelic science together. And we bring together an international cast every year. Last was 2023. This year, you can mark your calendars for September 5th through 7th, where we have made it a commitment to make online participation free. Last year we had over 1,000 attendees. Next year we probably expect more. Something else that's pretty exciting is one of our religion faculty, Dr. Gary Latterman. He has been doing deep historical and cultural work on hallucinogens and other sacred drugs, and he's coming out with a book in the coming year. In the meanwhile, he has been teaching a class for 2 years running on sacred drugs in the religious studies department. So a lot of the students who come to work in my lab have come through that class with their minds blown, as the article says, which I'm very grateful for. The last thing I'll mention is sort of by way of transition to the next slides is a recent publication of ours in JAMA Psychiatry that discusses the importance of integrating spiritual, existential, religious, and theological components in psychedelic-assisted therapies. And this sort of, on one hand, is a justification and a rationale, and on the other hand, it sort of charts the course for where we hope to go next. So before I describe this, I'll just get a little bit of vocabulary out of the way. Many people in this audience may be familiar with the idea of a mystical type experience. So this is a class of experiences that's been categorized and measured It consists of certain recognizable features like a noetic quality where you feel like some important knowledge has been imparted to you, a sense of unity with your environment, and a sense of ineffability where you can't really describe or have a hard time describing what happened afterwards. And all of these features are important and they're worth studying. But something that we're doing is we're actually taking a sideways step. And instead, we're going to be talking about spiritual, existential, religious, and theological dimensions in these experiences, within which mystical type experiences might be included. And a reason for doing this is we know that mystical type experiences don't always translate to people's daily lives, especially as we sort of think about people who are kind of ordinary folks who go to church or who are secular or who are atheist. And we want to make sure that our science can translate to the things that matter in people's lives. So we also focus on the existential, the spiritual, the religious, and the theological. The other problem with mystical type experiences is that as a construct, they have some recurrent issues that have made religion scholars somewhat cranky. So we focus here instead. So why focus on these CERT experiences in psychedelic science? Well, here's a mini literature review here that involves multiple trials involving different compounds for different treatment populations and different treatment targets. And all of these seem to suggest a dose-response relationship between psychedelics and the spiritual, existential, religious, and theological impacts. And here's another little mini literature review that again showcases multiple trials with different compounds and different treatment targets that suggest a relationship between the CERT impacts and their beneficial effects. So when a clinical scientist like me takes a look at this, I think, well, what's this thing in the middle, right? So I would think of that as a mediator of therapeutic effect, potentially. And if we discover a mediator in clinical science, we want to pay very close attention to it when we develop therapies. So by way of example, if we're doing psychotherapy with kiddos, we know that for young children, parent behaviors actually make a huge difference in their well-being. So if we're planning a psychotherapy and we know that we can include parents or a consideration of the parents in these therapies, we probably should, because it'll maximize the effects of these therapies. Similarly, therapeutic alliance. If we have a treatment that increases therapeutic alliance, that heightened therapeutic alliance is likely to improve the outcomes of the therapy. So we should focus on therapeutic alliance explicitly in treatments, which we do. So if we see CERT as a mediator, perhaps we should focus on it as well. And based on this idea, we have taken a lot of the science on spiritually integrated psychotherapies and developed a model and an approach that's sort of charting our course moving forward for spiritually integrated psychedelic assisted therapies. So in these therapies, you can see the sort of typical kind of treatment to care seeker application of the psychedelic. But the next pieces I think a lot of folks here will be familiar with that haven't made their way into psychedelic science as well. So if we think of who the care seeker is, we can think of their individual and intrapersonal characteristics, their beliefs, their genetics, their specific symptoms, their medical history, and also their worldview. And these are located within a broader sphere of interpersonal characteristics, their attachment relationships, their social relationships, and their bonds with their community, which are in turn located within a culture and a collective, which includes human geographies, histories, economies, and culture. Now, each of these levels, of course, has a high degree of CERT influence and importance on the level of personal beliefs and coping strategies, the interpersonal bonds that we have with our communities and the demands that they make of us, and features of collective resilience and trauma. So a CERT integrated psychedelic assisted therapy should assess for all of these things continuously to enable appropriate safety, to identify CERT risks and vulnerabilities for care seekers, and then to use those to integrate and tailor psychedelic assisted therapies to the individual care seekers. in the treatment. Of course, also adverse events and challenges are well noted, and sometimes these take on spiritual and existential dimensions. So the assessment of these dimensions is also a critical part of CERT integrated psychotherapies. So that's kind of the chart of where we're going. What are we doing now? Well, one of the things that we've developed is what we're calling the triad model. And this consists of the care seeker, who is the patient, the mental health clinician, and board certified spiritual health clinicians working together as equal members of a therapy team. And we've been using this in an ongoing trial, for example, on psilocybin for demoralization in cancer patients. And you can see this triad model working, where we have the patient, the mental health clinician, and spiritual health clinician allied together during the dosing session. This is part of a feasibility study of psilocybin-assisted therapy for cancer patients with demoralization and chronic pain. We're using a modified USONA protocol. It's CERT integrated, and we're using the psychospiritual triad. But importantly, and this is one of the directions of our center that I'm very passionate about, we're doing a study within a trial focusing on how can we improve the actual psychotherapy that we're doing in these treatments. So standards for psychotherapies are notoriously underdeveloped in the psychedelic space. And what we're focusing on is how can we identify components to alter, tweak, and improve to maximize benefits and minimize harms for patients. Related to minimizing harms, another key direction for our center is safety and adverse events monitoring. So in addition to psychiatric and physical symptoms, which are already typically monitored within psychedelic trials, typically assessed, we're also examining other dimensions such as cognitive and metacognitive adverse events. So an example of this would be something like loss of sense of self or ego dissolution, which can correspond with very positive and favorable outcomes for folks when they occur during a dosing session. But what happens if this ego dissolution continues on for days or weeks, or maybe even months? This can be profoundly debilitating. And at present, we don't have very good ways of capturing these kinds of adverse events. We're also very interested in CERT adverse events and being able to capture and respond to them. So things like religious alienation, existential distress, and theological struggles. We're also interested in cultural, community, and relational dimensions of adverse events. So that can include things like epistemic violence, cultural dismissal, and misappropriation, which can occur, but we don't really have a clear bead on what the outcomes of these events are after patients undergo psychedelic therapies. So a little bit more on our future directions. I'll mention some of the things that we're very excitedly working on. One is we're doing a lot of work to innovate methods in psychedelic science. We are looking particularly at improving the study of daily life in psychedelics. We don't think that the scales and measures that we usually use are often adequate, and just taking biochemical assays may not give us the full extent of the phenomenological experiences and their correlates. So we're looking at methods like voice diaries, electronically activated recorders, which take an acoustic diary of participants' daily lives outside of the lab, photo voice. We're developing instruments to measure religious change, and we think one of the most rigorous protocols for measuring adverse events for clinical trials. We're also doing work to really focus on the therapy development. So we're planning some comparison and dismantling studies of psychedelic-assisted therapies, which compare and contrast different psychotherapeutic elements within the psychedelic therapies to see what contributes the most to patient outcomes. We're also developing competencies for spiritual health clinicians who serve on psychedelic-assisted therapy teams. And finally, we have a lot of really exciting collaborative and training initiatives coming up. So one of our collaborative initiatives is a publicly available methods repository. This will not be owned by Emory. It's just going to be available to anybody who wants to use it. We're starting with adverse events assessment, and we're going to be expanding to other tools for measurement in psychedelics. We are part of a newly forming consortium between Melbourne University and Brown University and us, focusing on adverse event assessment and response. And we are moving toward a training fellowship model in psychedelics, where rather than having a siloed psychedelic assisted therapy training center, our idea is to treat it like we're treating the training of other medical clinicians and other medical staff, where it is part of an academic medical fellowship. So in terms of getting involved, for students, so this is an umbrella consortium center. It's not a training program. Currently, we're not doing anything like a master's. However, we are all very excited to work with our medical students. And right now we have a number of medical students working with our faculty. So if you end up being at Emory Medical School, it's just one of the medical schools that has a strong research focus, definitely come and seek us out. We're also very happy to co-mentor with faculty in one of our affiliated institutes and programs, if you want to come here for graduate school. In particular, if you are interested in the chaplaincy route or the divinity route or spiritual care route, so our CPE program is very interested in developing psychedelic chaplaincy, and definitely come and talk to us. And finally, we're not just restricted to Emory. If you're really interested in any of the stuff that I talked about, come seek me out or come seek out one of the faculty on our website. Here's a QR that'll take you directly to me, or you can use that email address. You can also visit our website, psychedelics.emory.edu. Maybe the best calling card for us is the symposium on the science of spirituality. The recordings are available at psychedelics.emory.edu, and you can just go to the events tab and watch any of the recordings. So I'm happy to take questions. I'm on anything that folks are interested in.
Thank you so much for your presentation. And I have a question that might show my ignorance, but maybe I'm the only one who's not ignorant to this, which is, I guess I haven't heard as much about the psychedelic chaplaincy routes and the roles that they have in the space. And I feel like you're one of the first centers that I'm hearing to address that training gap. And I'm curious if you have any more you can share on just that route and who it's for and kind of prerequisites and what that looks like, roughly speaking, in the space at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, psychedelic chaplaincy is such an important area. And I really think that it's sort of one of the links between the way that psychedelic therapies have been done historically in the US, which is to say underground, and also traditionally in non-clinical, non-Western medicine communities, and our sort of medical systems that can hopefully one day take insurance for psychedelic assisted therapies. So psychedelic chaplaincy involves sort of facilitation of psychedelic therapies by a spiritual health professional or a clinician, and members of a number of the training programs across the U.S. So this includes Naropa's training program, Berkeley's training program. They have a deep commitment to psychedelic chaplaincy. A resource that might be worth knowing about is the Psychedelic Care Network, which is part of the Transforming Chaplaincy Initiative. And they have monthly meetings. So one of our core faculty, Dr. Caroline Peacock, is a co-convener of that. In general, one of the things that we're working on at ECPS is developing the competencies and standards for spiritual health clinicians. These are board-certified medical professionals with over 3,000 hours of medical training and a very rigorous background to be one of the certifiable members of the medical community who can administer psychedelic-assisted therapies at the highest levels. I don't know if that answers the question.
Greatly so. And I have lots of people I have to send this to, because especially in the chaplaincy space and who have those degrees. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm seeing a really awesome question in the chat from Peter, who asks, Much of psychedelic science and research is focused on the clinical environment as we strive to do diligent research for use in medical and therapeutic models. However, one of the biggest limitations in much of this research is the majority of psychedelic use occurs outside the clinical setting. Are you doing any research on use outside the clinical setting? And if not, what information of this mode of use might you like to see researched to contribute to your work?
This is a question that's been really animating and vexing us over the last year. Yeah, we are doing research outside of on psychedelic use outside of the clinical setting. So partly this overlaps with the psychedelic chaplaincy question. So we have a paper that that's currently under review, but the paper focuses on spiritual health practitioners who have been involved in facilitating psychedelic assisted therapies. And most of these people's experiences, even though they've practiced in legal settings, many of their experiences have been in extra legal settings and in underground psychedelic therapies. I think it's vital to know what is happening in these spaces and to learn from them. Another initiative that we're working on, this is in collaboration with Brown University and part of our work on adverse events, is taking a large-scale, deep dive, longitudinal and epidemiological study of adverse events in psychedelics. And a lot of these uses are outside of clinical settings, although they're not restricted to extra clinical settings. And we're looking at the phenomenology, the consequences, and the influencing factors on trajectories of adverse events. And this can include co-use with other substances. This can use complementary practices like meditation or yoga, and it can include responses from people. So when you had your adverse event, did the person who was your facilitator, did they say that, you know, it's this really isn't a bad trip, it's just like a growth experience waiting to happen? Did they validate your experience? Things like that. So these are things we're intensely interested in. I'll also note we have a part of our methods development is this voice diary methodology that would come in an app, and we're hoping to just give away to people who are anticipating using psychedelics in non-clinical spaces. And rather than clicking through questionnaires, you know, page after page afterwards, they can just talk into their recorder and just give us the download of what is mattering to them from day to day. And we think that that might be a much more robust way of capturing the impacts of these experiences.
I see Haley is unmuted. Haley, do you have a question?
I didn't realize I was unmuted, but I really appreciate the work looking at the daily life measures. I feel like that's been missing from psychedelic science. And also just dismantling some of the larger constructs, I guess, like the mystical experience questionnaire being like the gold standard for measuring all of the effects. I really appreciate that. I guess one question would be, going forward, as you mentioned, a lot of methods in psychedelic science aren't exactly rigorous, but people keep relying on things like the mystical experience questionnaire, ego dissolution inventory, and other things like that. How do you think the field can kind of shift away from using like scales that aren't exactly all that rigorous to using more validated measures, I guess?
This is such a fantastic question. Again, this is it really appeals to me. I think there's a couple of things involved. One is just to echo the other presenters. I really think that interdisciplinarity is a major way, is a vital tool here. So psychologists studying religious and spiritual experiences tend to reduce them in ways that do not relate back to the experiences themselves particularly well. And, you know, part of the problem is, you know, we want these universal measures of religion and spirituality that apply to all people. And the more we succeed in making these universal, the less they look like religion and spirituality measures. And this could be potentially because, you know, who knows, maybe these are not perennial universal experiences. Maybe we need to study them in their particularity. And so, you know, to some extent, we're going to use broken tools if we're only relying on self-report survey measures, for instance. Tools like the electronically activated recorder, which again sort of grabs an acoustic diary of roughly 5% of a person's daily life, enough to exclude identifiable information, and sort of to keep the day private, but enough also to really get measurable indicators and linguistic markers of various features of their experience. Acoustic diaries. And honestly, I think we need mixed methods research. We also need to be more careful in how we use our scales. This is why we're moving away from the MEQ and from similar measures. We need them for translatability, but I think a growing number of us are skeptical about the construct validity and the generalizability.
Amazing. And I think I have a question on behalf of everyone before we let you go, in terms of what sort of positions are you personally and your center in general looking for people to become students, to work with you, postdocs, all of the things, because I think everyone wants to work with you now.
So like I mentioned, there's a few different avenues for working with us. One is to come here as a grad student in one of the affiliated programs. So our model in some ways, I think, looks similar to the UC Davis model, where if you're here and if you're with an affiliated center, come and work with us, or an affiliated program or lab or department. But also if you're here and, or if you're coming here as a graduate student, for example, as a clinical psychologist, I can speak to what this would look like in psychology, right? If you are in the psych department and you would like to sort of collaborate with your psych department mentor and myself, I'm very happy to make that happen. And I know that basically I can't think of anybody on our faculty who is not similarly interested and motivated for mentorship. We're going to be moving toward having postdocs in the next couple of years. So definitely kind of stay aware of that. And finally, again, the sort of chaplaincy route. So we are involved in training chaplains really at every level. So there's the CPE, there's residents, there's fellows, and we're moving to, again, a psychedelic chaplaincy fellowship. And also CPE educators, which is sort of the highest level of chaplaincy training that a person can have. And with our involvement in ECPS, these are all routes to be involved in psychedelic care, either in the research or in the facilitation and the organization of these services. Probably both.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing about the center. Last but not least, today in our Psychedelic Research Center series, we will hear about UC Berkeley's Center for the Science of Psychedelics. Unfortunately, due to a last-minute conflict, Rebecca Ashton-Dizan will not be able to be present herself today, but we will be sharing about the center.
All right. And the surprise presenter is me, Uma. And the reason that we're sharing today about Berkeley is because we really, really appreciate all the work that they're doing. And we're so sad that they can't be here. However, we did serendipitously have a presentation with them at Psychedelic Science and learn about their center. So I'm just going to share what I have learned about their center and what we shared at Psychedelic Science about them. But of course, by no means is this comprehensive. This is just a snippet, and we will be sharing the slides for their center's presentation out so that you can learn more about them as well as on their website. But I really want to highlight that their center is extremely interdisciplinary. Of course, they're doing world-class research, but they also focus on beyond the research from the perspectives of STEM. They do lots of things with particularly journalism. They have a journalism fellowship, and many people who are currently in the field and want to develop and speak on this field can work with them and be funded, which is incredible. They have facilitation certificate programs. They have lots of certificate programs across different disciplines as well. And I think one of the biggest parts that makes their center unique in how they contribute to the field is their massive open online course, or the MOOC, that concisely and comprehensively delivers material speaking to the complexity of psychedelic substances, including their healing capacities and their risks, and addresses centrally important aspects of history, biology, chemistry, psychology, and public policy related to psychedelics. It's very comprehensive, very open and accessible to people, which I think is extremely valuable. And they also have a very robust public health program focused on, where people can focus on psychedelic research and psychedelic understanding as well. One of our presenters at our psychedelic science panel was a doctor of public health student, so we can speak to that as well. Overall, UC Berkeley just has a really awesome and supportive program that toggles many different disciplines that one might not think would fit into the psychedelic space, because we hear so much about, specifically STEM research, which is extremely valuable, but so are other fields, as we've talked about through this conference so far. So make sure to check out their website and, of course, go through their slide deck to learn about the different labs, the different research programs, the different certificate programs and training programs and fellowships as well. Right. And with that, we are now going to move into an intermission. And from there, we will have a live Q&A with today's presenters. The format of this Q&A will involve starting with the questions that attendees ask using the Q&A function within Zoom, followed by an opportunity for attendees to raise their hand and ask a question live. Please try to keep your questions focused and feel free to direct a question to a specific presenter or as an open-ended question to the whole panel. We will now begin the intermission, and the Q&A will begin at 8:20 p.m. UTC, or 4:20 p.m. Eastern Time. And again, one last huge thank you to Dr. Wenther, Dr. Olson, Dr. Politsky, and the UC Berkeley Center for taking time to share with us today.